Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm back with Steve Durbin, and today we'll be talking about tackling the cyber skills shortage, innovation being key. As organizations of all sizes try to be more agile in responding to emerging threats, AI, legislation, and shifting strategies, finding people with the right skills has become something of a challenge. So my question is, how has the information security function evolved? And what impact has this had on the skills demanded?
I think, Tavia, that the reality is that information security today bears very little resemblance to information security, say, 10 to 15 years ago. And I say that because every organization has become very much more cyber-enabled. We live in a fully functioning digital age, if I could put it that way. Certainly from the business perspective. What that means is that security clearly has moved from being, let's just protect the firewall, into being integrated very much more into the DNA of an organization, and that's not really overstating it. There isn't a business I'm aware of, I've said this many times, that isn't dependent in some way, shape or form on cyber enablement to go about transacting its daily business. And so if we then step back and say, okay, if that is where we're at, what then is the requirement in terms of protecting our information and the way that we go about doing business? And it's a very different one. 10 years or so ago, we were able to throw a security blanket over our network perimeter. There is no such thing today as a network perimeter. What is it? What is the endpoint? The endpoint is me on a subway, maybe, deciding that I'm suddenly going to go and check some email because I've got Wi-Fi.
Or your bank
Wi-Fi.
balance.
Or my bank balance, for instance, just to make things even more interesting. And so we're opening up different potential vulnerabilities. We need to undertake extensive end-user training programs that are not just sprints but are marathons that never end. To continually update our users' skill sets in this space. That requires security people not just to be technically proficient. It means they do need to understand the way in which technology is being used to drive the business. They need to have much softer skills in being able to convey messages. They need to be good listeners. They need to be able to convey security messages in the language of the business and the language of the boardroom. And they also need to have a broad brush understanding of some of the legislative landscape, because that is continually changing as well and impacts on security. So the job has become very much more complicated, more, I would say, interesting, and it's become fast-moving. And the best security people are responding to that in a very agile way, looking at different ways of doing things. But of course, there's a shortage of them. And most organizations want people with experience in these particular areas. They want a safe bet, if you like, in that particular space. And that simply isn't available. There aren't enough of these people to go around.
It's interesting. There's becoming an aspect to this job that's about the art of it and not just the data, the ones and zeros, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think that very good chief information security officers, for instance, are increasingly tending to have a higher level of business awareness. They are able to command very significant salaries for the jobs that they do, and of course, that they could be unemployed almost immediately in certain instances when a significant breach takes place. So some would say that they're well worth the money. But the point, I think, within all of this is that the job has, as you rightly point out, changed away from focusing just on technology to really having to understand the way in which technology is enabling business. And that is something I think that is really only starting to become apparent to a lot of organizations.
That's interesting. So much more about the psychology, sociology, culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And even some, what I would consider to be some really smart, forward-looking security departments employing psychologists on the books to help them understand the way in which people react and respond and behave so that they get better insight into just what it is that they can do to support the business in this regard.
That's a fascinating change. How might the gig economy help smaller organizations with their security workforce?
I think the gig economy is really exciting. I'm a big fan of it. I think that it is here to stay, I think, for a number of different reasons. The gig economy has a number of benefits, not just to the individuals, but also to organizations. It does mean that I'm able to pick and choose the kinds of jobs that I particularly want to do. It gives me flexibility as an individual. You don't actually need to travel as much to get to work anymore. You can transact business from anywhere. From an enterprise perspective, it means as well that we should be able to pick out the right people to undertake certain projects and so on. It also means, I think, that we can gain better insights into the ways in which we can deliver agile security, because, of course, the people that we're talking to may well have operated in a number of different scenarios, different environments, and so we're able to build up that collaborative horsepower, if you like, in different individuals who are operating in that way. So I think that it brings about some very significant changes for the industry. Will it help with a skills shortage? We'll have to wait and see. I think we're going to need to do a number of other things in that particular space. I think we're going to have to look at how we can bring in skills from other parts of the business outside of security into that security space, particularly as we're talking about security needing to be much more business aligned. I think we also have to consider the role that technology will be able to play. So artificial intelligence, for instance, could be a way to resolving some of the skills shortages. I know a number of different organizations that are exploring the way in which AI can be used constructively in a security environment, for instance. You know, some of the challenges, for instance, that things like the EU GDPR or indeed in the United States, in New York State DFS, bring in terms of understanding where data is. I can imagine artificial intelligence, machine-to-machine communication being used, for instance, to try to, at some point in the future, identify pieces of data that are not compliant, to rectify that or to flag them up so that the appropriate measures can be taken. At the moment, of course, we're seeing AI being very much used in terms of things like trying to anticipate the ways in which threats and vulnerabilities might be emerging based on machine learning. I don't foresee an instance where technology is able to be omnipotent in this particular area. I think there is still a role for the individual, and that means we have to continue to identify those people. We have to continue to train them appropriately. We have to continue to support them in the businesses. And I think we have to really take advantage of the different skills that they're acquiring, perhaps outside of our businesses. And that's really where the gig economy comes into play.
Interesting. What can educational and professional bodies in information security, such as the ISF, do to help mitigate the projected workforce shortage? How can we make sure that we're developing the appropriate security workforce of the future?
I think there's a number of things. I think that we can roll out good practice. We can help people to establish frameworks, policies. We can help them to adopt risk methodologies as a means of assessing the level of risk that they consider to be important and relevant. We can help in terms of transitioning, perhaps, business people into the security space. Fundamentally, for me, we need to be focusing our efforts much more into our schools and our universities and colleges, because undoubtedly one of the challenges that we face is how do we attract, train, and retain the cyber specialists of the future, because everybody is chasing around hunting these people down. And that has to start in schools. It has to start with us making the case that this is an exciting, vibrant, interesting business for people to get into, that it does have sound career prospects, that it isn't dull, and that it is something of the future. That really, I think, is where the attention needs to be spent. And certainly we're seeing governments pouring money into this particular area. We're not seeing the level of uptake yet, but I think for me it's more of a generational thing. It will take time.
Interesting. To learn more about how your organization can ensure that you're developing the security workforce of the future, that your company will need to thrive, check the ISF's publication From Promoting Awareness to Embedding Behaviors and the upcoming ISF Workforce Project. You can find all that information and more at securityforum.org.